PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. Here's my recap of Game 5 of the World Chess Championship. Gukesh Dommaraju from India playing white. Ding Liren from China playing black. So scores even going into this game. Gukesh repeats e4 that he played in the very first game of the match. And perhaps a slight surprise, Ding repeated the French again from game 1. So this wasn't just a surprise in that first opening game. You know, normally he goes with e5, but he's repeated e6. So Gukesh obviously had something in mind against this, and here it is. So in the first game we saw knight c3. Today he played the exchange variation. Well, this is always thought to be quite a mild way of playing the opening. Of course, it's a symmetrical pawn structure and white has the extra move, so you could say, well, you know, slightly better for white. But proving an advantage from this opening can be difficult. But in the modern computer age, you'll find that this is very much approved by computers. They think that this is as good a try as any for getting the advantage. So bishop d3, yeah, white's pieces are on decent squares. And now here's the first moment where Ding breaks the symmetry. Of course, you could just copy with bishop d6, but white always has that extra move. Ding played c5, so making a pawn break in the middle. And I have to say, I like this move a lot because it's inviting white to play, to exchange, and then black has this isolated queen's pawn, but that gives black more space in the center, and I really like the attacking chances that black can get from that, even despite the theoretical structural weakness. But Gukesh doesn't go in for that. Instead, he just played c3 pretty quickly. So, you know, this wasn't a big surprise for him. Now black can play bishop d6, knight c6, but Ding pushed straight away. So fixing that central pawn structure. The bishop maintains its position on this nice diagonal, and then bishop d6. I mean, this is a common idea for black in other variations of the French. I mean, this pawn on d5 is, you know, nice and stable. So I think this is a very reasonable way for black to play. Queen e2 check, again played fairly quickly by Gukesh. So that if the bishop blocks, for example, then white can play knight g5, attacking that bishop. So Ding played queen e7 fairly quickly, an exchange of queens, and then king takes fairly quickly. So black is going to castle by hand, as it were, putting the rook into the middle in one go, and then the king just drops back behind it. There have actually been a few games played from this position, mostly email correspondence games, actually, which tells me that this is kind of approved by computers. They approve of play from both sides, because generally in those email correspondence games, the players follow the kind of computer suggestions. So castles from Gukesh, that was his first little think here. In fact, he said after the game that he couldn't quite remember what his sort of preparation was. 3.5 minutes he thought over castles. Okay, very normal move, of course. And rook e8, so preparing just to tuck the king back into safety. Rook e1 check, the king goes back, an exchange of rooks. So that means, so why has Gukesh done that? It means that perhaps he can get the rook to the e-file and claim control of that e-file before black's pieces come out. So bishop g5, okay, straightforward development. So potentially looking to take on f6 and take on h7, therefore knight d7. So that just supports the knight on f6, but it does block in that bishop on c8. So black has to find a way to untangle. So knight d2. At the moment, white's pieces certainly look better placed than black's. White's development is pretty smooth with this rook coming over. All white's pieces look pretty nice. Ding has to solve this problem of how these pieces come into the game. And it's at this moment that Ding thought for 30 minutes, 3-0, 30 minutes. A big time investment. But it was worth it because he came up with a good plan. h6. Attacking the bishop. Well, if the bishop exchanges off for the knight, then of course that solves a lot of black's problems. The bishop will come out. This is very, very stable. Black has the two bishops. So the bishop came back to h4. And here's the nice move, knight h5. So that covers the g3 square, also looks at f4, and looks to hunt down that bishop with g5. So even though black's development is very poor on this side of the board, it's very hard for white to exploit that. And actually, this is a very positive plan from Ding. And now Gukesh had the big think. He gave a check, so the rook swings over, which looks reasonable. It's very hard for white to find a decent plan here, actually. I mean, one obvious way is to sort of swing this knight round. But if knight f1, then g5, the bishop has to go back. Black can exchange off. And Gukesh talked about this position after the game, and he just thought that black should be absolutely fine here. Indeed, black can even think about gaining the initiative on the queen side with b5 and potentially b4. And with the two bishops, in particular that dark squared bishop, which doesn't have an opponent, that looks nice for black. Certainly there's potential to get the initiative. And this indeed has been played in a recent game where actually white played knight takes. And then knight f6, I think, again is reasonable for black. But black actually took here and then played knight f6. But that's also actually quite reasonable for black. Black is actually secure on the king side. And there is potential to make this pawn break on the queen side. So if the normal move, knight f1, wasn't looking so great, well, what should Gukesh play with white? Well, after 10 minutes, he lashed out. g4. So this seems to be his move of the match. We've seen it in, in the first game, where it certainly didn't work out very well. Worked out better in that third game, but so here we go. g4. Well, positionally, very odd. I mean, I would even say in the third game it wasn't great, and it looks very odd here because that knight sinks itself in on this beautiful square f4. So why has Gukesh done that? Well, it does kind of save this bishop, which comes back to this square, and there is a pin here. But now Ding came up with an excellent move. One might suppose that knight f6 is the correct move here, but actually, I mean, white is solid enough in that position. Knight b6 played by Ding very quickly actually is a much stronger idea because this knight has potential on this side of the board, as we'll see. So Gukesh now pushed that g-pawn. Well, that was the problem in game 3. It wasn't such a good push, even though it worked out very well. Here, it doesn't look like the best move. Now, we'll see the game continuation in a second, but Ding thought afterwards that white should simply play the knight into e5. So bishop takes, knight threatened. So bishop takes. And now he thought pawn takes. So there's a threat here. The knight sinks itself in on d3. So that has to be exchanged off. Bishop takes. Pawn takes. And Ding thought that black might be a bit better in this line. But actually, it should burn out to a draw. I mean, white's pawns are not very pretty. You know, they're really disjointed and split. But actually, you know, white is active enough here. But Gukesh played g5, and that's a risky move. Ding exchanged. Now, be careful. There's a threat to play knight h7 and rook e8 mate, or mate next move. So bishop d7, of course. So solid, the bishop comes into play and the rook potentially comes over to one of these squares. Knight gf3, Gukesh brings the knight back. In fact, you know, on g5 it's not doing too much. And Ding swooped across with the rook to challenge the rook on the open file. I mean, Gukesh could just exchange here. I mean, that's probably the surest way to play the position. I mean, black is a little bit better. You can see it's all about the pawn structure. These two pawns are together. These two pawns are split. And there is potential later on for perhaps this knight to come in here. Not at the moment. I know there's a pin. But Gukesh played knight e5. And actually, that's a little bit risky. He should have played rook takes. And again, black is a little bit better there, but white should be all right. But pawn takes is really pushing it, because after knight d3, okay, that hits lots of things. So Gukesh exchanged off. And it was only around here that Gukesh appreciated that his position was actually a bit dubious. He's on the edge in this position. At first, he thought that he could prevent the knight hopping into c4 with b3. But you can see now that that pawn is weakened. Rook c8. And as he admitted afterwards, after rook c1, d4, his position is on the point of collapse. So you can see there's a pin on the c file. If c4, then here's the killer move. Knight d5, again exploiting that pin. And the knight, which seemed to be out on a limb doing nothing on b6, hops back into the game. Once it hits c3, whoa, white is in big trouble in that position. And if we come back here after rook c8, then knight b1 protects that pawn. But then bishop g4, beautiful position. And the bishop will sink itself in on e2, protecting that pawn, and yeah, white is in big trouble. So having realised that b3 was dubious, Gukesh had to put the brakes on. And he played f3. Now there are various things that Ding can try here. Potentially knight a4 is an interesting move. Bishop f5. Rook e6. I mean, these are all possible ways to try and squeeze something from the position. Remember, that is quite a big pass pawn on d3. He went for the most straightforward move, knight c4. So it exchanges off the blockader, which of course is dangerous with his pawn just 2 steps from queening, but he found an excellent move here. Rook e4. So hits this one. And if bishop e6, then rook d4, the rook is active. And because there are opposite coloured bishops, that's very difficult for black to make any progress in that position, in spite of this protected passed pawn on d3. Ding played bishop c6, hitting the rook. Now, it's important that white does not play rook takes c4, because here black would win with rook d8, and that pawn is going to go through. But instead rook d4, it's a really strong move. So if bishop takes f3, well, bishop takes f3 played. So Ding is a pawn up just for a moment. King f2. And here's where basically Ding settled for a draw. He played the bishop back to c6. We'll look at that in a second. But bishop h5 was perhaps the last try for Ding. But in fact, I think white is okay here. The king activates, so that takes care of this pawn. And after b5, protecting here, then white has c3, so undermines this pawn on d3 basically. Black can exchange and play bishop g6. Of course, black is a pawn up, but after if white ever gets the chance to exchange rooks, then it's a dead draw. So it shouldn't be too much difficulty holding that for white. White has sufficient control here. But still, bishop h5 was the last chance. Instead, Ding just played bishop c6. And this is basically just acquiescing to the draw. Rook takes rook d8, threatening to push, but then rook d4, an exchange of rooks. And once the rooks are off, then opposite colour bishop endgames with nothing special going on. Well, it's just a draw, basically. Gukesh even ends up with an extra pawn here, but it makes no odds because of this superb light square blockade. And at this moment, the players realise there's nothing to play for. So they repeated moves like this. No draw offers allowed before move 40. So they decided just to repeat the position. And threefold repetition of the position means a draw. And again, they didn't even bother calling over the arbiter. So, fifth game drawn. I think there were some surprises there. I would have expected Gukesh to play something a bit sharper against Ding's French. I think that suits his style more. This exchange variation might be kind of computer approved, but Ding showed that his preparation was very good actually. And this endgame holds absolutely no fear for black, and Ding handled it extremely well with this idea of knight h5. And at that point, Gukesh played a little bit inaccurately. Ding handled it well. And yes, there was even a chance right at the end to perhaps play for a bit more. But yeah, I think it would have ended in a draw anyway. So there we go. I think Ding can be happy with surviving the test of playing with the black pieces. So scores are even after 5 games. 6th game is tomorrow, Sunday, at the usual time. Ding will have the white pieces. Will he play something gentle and quiet? Or like in the previous game he had with white in game 4? Or will he play something more straightforward We've seen a couple of quiet games. I think we deserve some fireworks in the next one, but who knows? Match play is very, very different from normal tournament play. See you for the next game.